Hello, my name is Jason Zhang,
I'm Cyrus Fisher.
and this is our performance. The category is Frontiers, how the Harlem Ball scene redefined queer Black power.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the 2023 National History Ball. Tonight the category is A History of Harlem Ballroom. Harlem's queer Black community overcame ostracism in the 1960s and 70s to expand ball culture. Ballroom provided communities and platforms to oppressed groups and pushed the frontiers that confine queer Black life in America. That's why it's so important that we hold this ball today. Each of our contestants will act out a short performance explaining the origins and impacts of the Harlem Ball scene. Then our judges will give their scores, and at the end, one contestant will snatch grand prize. Now let's have a ball. First up, contestant 1 as a train conductor in the First Great Migration.
Throughout the 1910s and 20s, I conducted dozens of trains carrying African Americans from the South to the big cities up north. This is what's now known as the First Great Migration. These migrants were in search of better jobs, but I think what really drove them to migrate was the economic oppression and racial violence that they often faced down south. Cities like Philly and Chicago were popular destinations. There was one place it seemed like everyone was going. It was a neighborhood in New York City known as Harlem. Compared to the rural, segregated communities down south, it seemed like Harlem had everything. But this neighborhood didn't turn out to be the perfect safe haven that many migrants made it out to be. Discrimination was still rampant, and many of the migrants faced challenges not only for being Black, but for being queer as well. Queer Black people in Harlem were called slurs, lost jobs, and were often rejected by their very own families. Marginalized by society, Harlem's queer Black communities were left with little hope and few places to go.
Thank you, train conductor. Our next performer is a drag queen who will be telling us about early Harlem balls of the 1920s. Hello, everyone. Life was difficult for Black queer people in 1920s New York City, but us Harlemites began to develop a subculture within the streets of Harlem. This is what we know today as ballroom, or the ball scene. Throughout the 1920s, I competed in pageant-style balls alongside other queer contestants and drag queens. We were scored on beauty, fashion, and confidence by a judging panel to earn trophies and fame. In the early days, we received lots of criticism from the public. Many of them had never seen cross-dressers like myself before and thought we looked absurd. In 1916, the New York Committee of 14 released a report attempting to crack down on prostitution in the city's nightclubs. They called us phenomenal male perverts in expensive frocks and wigs, looking like women. But regardless of criticism we received, Harlem Balls pushed the frontiers of queer expression by providing rare communities where queer people could feel comfortable in their sexualities. Balls offered representation and a welcoming community for everyone.
For everyone!
Hey, this is my part. Who are you?
It's Crystal, darling, Crystal Abeja. I was a trans Black icon in the Harlem Ball scene. But take it from me, when I was competing, Port was anything but a welcoming community for everyone. I'll take it from here. Although ballroom offered sanctuary for queer and trans youth, it, like everything else at the time, was still plagued by racism. White contestants could afford all the best costumes, and they constantly received favoritism from the judges. Meanwhile, Black contestants were shunned from competing. Many of us were even forced to paint our skin lighter just to have a chance at winning. White queer people who were already facing challenges for being queer were now oppressing their fellow queer people for being Black. I myself was a victim of this discrimination when I competed in the New York 1967 Miss All-American Camp Beauty pageant. I competed with drag queens in big wigs and sparkly gowns, and at the end, the judges came together and announced me, Crystal Abeja, the third runner-up. Black contestants never won balls. I was so furious that I stormed right off that stage. You know she didn't deserve it, all of them, and the judges knew it too, because she was terrible. Look at her makeup. She doesn't equal me, and I'm doing it bad, but I have a right to show my color, darling. I'm beautiful, and I know I'm beautiful. The pageant ball and its contestants, including myself, were recorded in 1968 documentary, The Queen. This one was viewed by generations of queer people who were inspired by the courage that I had to speak out against injustice in ballroom. But I didn't stop there. Fed up with the discrimination, I started up my own ball in 1972. I called it the first annual House of LaBeija Ball. I made sure this ball would be one made by Black people for Black people. The House of LaBeija was a chosen family for queer people who had been rejected by the biological ones. The house parents would care after the house children, and we would also compete together in the balls. Nowadays, hundreds of active ball houses exist all over the world, but the very first of them all was the House of LaBeija.
Thank you for that passionate performance, Miss Crystal. Next up, we have the daughter of Crystal LaBeija, Pepper LaBeija. Hello, I'm Pepper LaBeija. I was a mother of the House of LaBeija, and you just met my mother, Crystal. After Crystal's Harlem Ball, ball houses like the House of LaBeija started popping up all over the scene in the 1970s and 80s, but ballroom itself was also shifting from pageant-style competitions to being based on categories, which were themes contestants could compete in. For instance, in an executive realness category, contestants would don suits and ties, putting on the persona of a wealthy person. This allowed them to feel rich and powerful when oftentimes in real life they were unable to due to poverty and discrimination. I was one of the many ballroom icons featured in the 1990 documentary Paris is Burning, where they explained what made realness categories so significant for Black queers. This is white America. Every media you have, from TV to movies to magazines to films, this is white America. And when it comes to the minorities, especially Black, we as a people for the past 400 years is the greatest example of behavior modification in the history of civilization. We have had everything taken away from us, and yet we have all learned how to survive. During the AIDS epidemic in the early 1980s, gay Black ballgoers were hit harder than almost anyone else in the country. Ballroom allowed Black queers to unite and protest against the lack of government action regarding the crisis. Ballgoers founded organizations like ACT UP and were some of the loudest voices calling for a change. And to this day, ballgoers are still active in social movements, including the 2020 Black Trans Lives Matter movement. Some might take a look at ballroom and say we're just dressing up and dancing around in our feathers and sparkles, but ballroom was necessary in Harlem. It gave us platforms and a chance to feel like superstars in our own way. Thank you, Miss Pepper. Next up, we have a performance explaining the origins of voguing and how ballroom has impacted modern American culture.
Throughout the 1980s, a new dance form known as voguing began to emerge within the Harlem Balls. Voguing was a mix of rhythmic movements and sharp poses similar to those from the magazine after which it was named. Voguing also came with its own subgenre of music. Vogue music was a mix of disco, R&B, hip-hop, and other genres like what you just heard. Vogue music has even been sampled by modern artists like Madonna, Frank Ocean, and Beyonce. Voguing helped to integrate American entertainment, giving queer Black people a dance of their very own.
Thank you to all of our contestants for those magnificent performances. Whether it's houses, protests, or voguing, it's clear how the Harlem ball scene expanded ballroom culture, making it more inclusive and prominent than ever before. But now is the moment we've all been waiting for. The judges have reviewed each performance carefully, and they have decided that grand prize goes to Miss Crystal LaBeija.
Thank you so much. While balls might not have always been just, there's no denying how they've helped expand the frontiers for the inclusion of queer Black people in ballrooms, helping to make us all, in one way or another, winners! Thank you.